The date is August 1967. In the sterile, climate-controlled depths of Langley, Virginia, a new operational unit coalesces within the CIA's counterintelligence staff, a special operations group designed for a singular, unprecedented task. They were about to begin compiling detailed dossiers on thousands of American citizens, activists whose only crime was protesting a war or demanding civil rights. The official narrative claimed they were tracking foreign influence, but the reality was far more intimate, far more alarming. How could the primary foreign intelligence agency of the United States legally turn its vast surveillance apparatus inward, onto the streets and homes of its own people, without warrants, without oversight, building mountains of secret information? The answer is that they simply decided they could. In November of that same year, the CIA launched a formal study into the peace movement, feeding the resulting intelligence directly into the burgeoning file system of Operation Chaos. The electronic hum of surveillance equipment filled the air as agents meticulously monitored public demonstrations, capturing voices and faces that belonged on the front pages of newspapers, not tucked away in classified storage. The truth of what was happening within those walls, the systematic violation of constitutional safeguards, would later be summarized by the Church Committee's stark conclusion: there is no inherent constitutional authority for the president or any intelligence agency to violate the law. In the late 1960s, the nation fractured under the weight of Vietnam and simmering racial tension. From Berkeley to Detroit, the streets were alive with dissent, and someone was listening. Inside the agency's walls, the work was methodically. Agents moved sensitive mail, opening envelopes under the soft glow of a single desk lamp, carefully resealing them to avoid detection by the Postal Service. Every scrap of correspondence, every reported conversation, was logged onto index cards, destined for manila file folders stamped with internal classification markers. The program quickly ballooned beyond its initial scope. By 1968, the height of anti-war fervor, the monitoring intensified. The intelligence gathered was not about Moscow or Beijing. It was about students, professors, and organizers operating entirely within the United States. The collected data grew so voluminous it required dedicated off-site storage, rooms where the air was thick with the stale scent of aged cigarette smoke and forgotten bureaucracy. By 1971, the unrest reached a violent apex, marked by events like the bombing of the U.S. Capitol. The operation, intended to root out foreign meddling, had become an institutionalized dragnet on American political activity. The technical infrastructure, perhaps utilizing systems for internal communications monitoring, quietly processed endless hours of tape recordings taken from wiretaps and informants embedded within protest groups. Imagine the scene now: a vast, cold archive room, illuminated only by the narrow beam of a swinging overhead lamp. Thousands of identical manila folders line the shelves, each labeled with a name and an address, a citizen under scrutiny. The papers inside detailed travel plans, private associations, and political leanings, all collected without the judicial checks that define a free society. One folder, thicker than the rest, sits open on a steel table. Inside are photographs, surveillance logs, and handwritten notes, the life story of a civil rights leader, meticulously indexed. The soundscape here is not of protest, but of the quiet, rhythmic click of an antiquated typewriter keying in fresh intelligence, ensuring every detail is permanently recorded. The goal of Operation Chaos was never fully clarified, even to those running it. Ostensibly, it was to determine if foreign powers were funding or directing domestic unrest. But as the years passed and the volume of purely domestic targets increased, people with no traceable foreign links, the line between necessary intelligence and illegal spying dissolved completely. The scope remained intentionally vague. While definitive numbers are sealed in redacted files, thousands were compiled. We know the key targets were focused on the anti-war movement and organizations pushing for racial equality. The sheer audacity of the operation, a premier spy agency operating outside the very laws it was sworn to protect, was a ticking time bomb waiting for exposure. The exposure, when it finally came in the mid-1970s, was shocking. The American public learned that the same agency that hunted spies abroad had been running a massive secret surveillance program at home. The Church Committee investigations peeled back the layers, revealing the illegal infrastructure that had been built and maintained throughout the late 60s and early 70s. The committee uncovered the protocols, or lack thereof. There was no clear legal justification for the scope of chaos. It was an assertion of power, an executive branch decision that bypassed Congress and the courts. The intelligence wasn't just gathered, it was shared, sometimes improperly, with the FBI and other domestic agencies, creating a cross-pollination of surveillance that further entangled the lives of activists in official scrutiny. Consider the environment. A young agent, sitting late at night, reviewing transcripts from a monitored meeting. He wears a dark, matte-textured jacket, the collar turned up against the imagined chill of classified information. He is surrounded by stacks of internal CIA classification stamps, the red ink stark against the pale paper of the briefing reports. He underlines a name, another American activist, marking the file with a symbol that indicates maximum security. The very act of underlining that name suggests a decision point. Where does this file go next? Does it lead to a quiet visit from domestic law enforcement, or does it simply vanish into the deep storage vaults? The inherent danger in that ambiguity is the central mystery of Operation Chaos. How far did the internal violation truly extend? The records show that even as the program wound down, the habit of domestic intelligence gathering persisted, morphing into later, equally controversial surveillance programs referenced in the shadow of post-9/11 laws. But Operation Chaos stands as a stark, foundational example of intelligence overreach, a moment when the guardians of national security turned their most potent tools against the very freedoms they were supposed to defend. The files remain, silent testaments to a domestic war waged in secret against citizens who simply dared to speak out. Chapter 4: The Echoes of Silence. The dismantling of Operation Chaos did not erase the infrastructure it created. When the Church Committee issued its damning report in 1976, the immediate fallout was a flurry of internal memos and congressional mandates, all promising reform, all pledging never again to allow such a clandestine domestic operation.
Yet the experience left a permanent scar on the operational philosophy of the intelligence community. If they could do it once, they could certainly do it again, perhaps with better cover, perhaps under the guise of new threats. The physical evidence of chaos, the thousands of folders, the magnetic tapes of intercepted communications, were subjected to intense scrutiny. Some were destroyed, burned, or shredded in acts of bureaucratic self-preservation, erasing the paper trail that might have led to prosecution or deeper embarrassment. Other files were merely transferred, relocated from the immediate spotlight of Langley's operational wings to the deep, dusty recesses of less frequently accessed records centers, awaiting a future date when public interest waned and the records could be reviewed, sanitized, or simply forgotten. The chilling legacy of chaos lay not just in the files, but in the mindset cultivated during those years. Agents and analysts who had participated, even peripherally, understood the immense power derived from secret, unchecked knowledge about one's own citizenry. This understanding, this muscle memory of internal surveillance, was not easily forgotten. It became a foundational, albeit unwritten, lesson for the next generation of intelligence professionals. When the nation faces perceived existential threat, the rules, however sacred, become negotiable. The investigation itself was fraught with obstruction. Agency officials testified under oath, sometimes offering carefully curated truths, other times pleading ignorance or citing the necessity of national security to shield specific details. The very act of investigating the intelligence community became an exercise in navigating layers of secrecy, a mirror reflecting the very culture of obfuscation that chaos represented. The committee members, facing an adversary that operated outside the conventional bounds of law, struggled to extract the full scope of the damage.
One particular area of concern remained stubbornly murky: the relationship between the CIA's domestic intelligence and the FBI's domestic intelligence arm, the Domestic Security Investigations (DSI) unit, which focused heavily on infiltration and counterintelligence against subversive groups. While CAIUS was ostensibly CIA-led, the intelligence gathered was often immediately, and sometimes explicitly illegally, shared with the FBI. This cross-pollination effectively laundered the CIA's illegal surveillance, presenting it to the FBI as actionable domestic intelligence, thereby circumventing the FBI's own, slightly more rigid, internal guidelines. Consider the quiet, procedural aftermath. Within the CIA's Directorate of Operations, a series of internal reviews took place, not to punish, but to refine methodologies. The lesson absorbed was pragmatic. The next time, ensure the paper trail clearly demonstrates a foreign nexus, however tenuous, to satisfy any future congressional inquiry. The technical capacity developed for monitoring domestic communications was quietly integrated into other, seemingly innocuous technical services divisions, lying dormant until a new crisis, a new war, a new perceived internal enemy would awaken it. The activists whose lives had been detailed in those manila folders experienced a different kind of aftermath. Some found themselves subtly marginalized, denied security clearances, passed over for promotions in their professional lives, or subjected to unexplained audits. They knew they had been watched, but proving the extent of the conspiracy or linking the surveillance directly to tangible professional harm proved almost impossible. The damage was atmospheric, a chilling effect spread across the landscape of American political expression. The freedom to dissent was technically preserved, but the willingness to exercise